Hey guys, and welcome back to the FFP. My name is Christian, and welcome to the Week 16 waiver wire video. Now, first things first, guys, congratulations if you made it through the last round of the playoffs, and if you didn't, I don't know why you're still watching this video, but I guess thank you for the support. First thing I want to say, as always, there'll be timestamps down in the description below, and feel free to leave a comment asking questions, thoughts, concerns, anything that you want. I'll do my best to read it and to answer it, and I know that a lot of people will go on to answer each other's comments even if I don't get to it. It's really now or never. This is championship week. I know a few leagues, not all, not even most, few, do their championships week 17. Most do them week 16. So for a lot of you guys, this is it. This is the week. It's go big or go home, as they say. And you know what? Let's just get into it. I got nothing else to add to this except some fantasy information and some options to consider this week. So as we always start off with the quarterbacks, let's kick this off with Ryan Tannehill. This seems pretty obvious, and yet it's surprising to see he's still 32% available. That's a little bit shocking to me, but his numbers are great. We all know his numbers have been fantastic. In fact, he scored over 20 fantasy points in 7 of his 8 games this year, 7 of his 8 starts it is. And I believe in the last 6 weeks, he has thrown at least 2 touchdown passes every single game. So I believe that's 5 games in the last 6 weeks. So 5 straight weeks with 2 or more touchdown passes. He's been great. And, you know, you couple that with a great matchup. Adrian Brown's been playing well, and he goes against the Saints. They allow the 10th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. That number has been steadily increasing. I know just last week it was the 11th most, and that's because the last few weeks have been really bad for the Saints. They've allowed 9 touchdown passes in the last 3 games, so that's, you know, an average of 3 touchdown passes a game. All in all, when we look at this seems to be a great matchup for Tannehill. He's not the most highly available quarterback out there, but he is fairly available, and we're going to talk about some more guys. And honestly, of all the guys, he's the guy I like the most. He has really, as I've said many times, completely revitalized that offense, and it's way more fun watching the Titans now than it was when it was just straight defense for them. But let's get on with our next quarterback option for the week. Gardner Minshew. There's a lot of risk here. I don't love him. He's not a Ryan Tannehill, but he is 85% available. So for those of you in deep leagues or 2 quarterback leagues, definitely take a look at him. Plays the Falcons that allow the 3rd most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. And like I say, he's not the best quarterback, but he threw 2 touchdowns last week, and he's got great weapons. Even with DJ Chark out, he's still got Fournette, Chris Conley, Dede, Westbrook. He's still got guys to throw to, and you know, he's a young player. He's playing for his future, so you know, he's not a Ryan Fitzpatrick or one of those older quarterbacks who may not even be playing next year. Like, you know, this guy's playing to get more time to be the starter next year, so you can bet that no matter what happens, this guy's going 100%. And I do like that, because there are always those players who are, you know, studs, and we even heard it from a few guys. I just watched an interview the other day of a guy who was saying, you know, at some point in the season when you're winning big, week 16, week 17, you kind of just start getting worried about getting injured, and they sometimes, you know, play 90% or whatever, and that's not going to be a concern for him. This guy's playing. And the other thing to it really is that he has, you know, he's had that one game and then he lost his job to Nick Foles. Nick Foles played terrible, but all in all, he's played better than Foles. In that one game, I believe he still threw over like 300 yards. And so, again, not great, but in deep leagues, Gardner Minshew is a guy to look at. I definitely take a look at Mitchel Trubisky. He's 78% available, so he is highly available, and I probably like him more than Gardner Minshew. With Allen Robinson there, with Anthony Miller, who's really turning it on lately, he's got some good weapons. He's played a lot better recently. In fact, again, a lot of people know this, but in 3 of his last 6 games, he's thrown 3 touchdown passes. So he's had some very effective outings, and they're not afraid to let him throw the ball a lot and in efficient situations. What I mean by efficient situations is in the red zone. A lot of quarterbacks are good quarterbacks, but they get into the red zone, and typically what happens is you run the ball and you score a touchdown on the ground game. That is very common. But they're not like that. In fact, he's thrown 11 touchdown passes in the red zone since week 7. That is 2nd most among quarterbacks, and so he's absolutely one of those guys who has sort of had that production, right, where he is being very well used. And furthermore, he's being used in a fair amount of volume too. So when we go back to 6 games ago, he threw the ball just 23 times. But after that, he threw the ball 43 times, 41 times, 38, 31, and 53 times last week. So he's certainly getting his attempts up there. And with the weapons we mentioned earlier, he's definitely a guy to look at this week versus the Chiefs. The Chiefs are a good offense. They've figured some things out. They're going to score their points. And they're definitely going to force the Bears and Trubisky to throw the ball quite a bit. So it could be another good fantasy day for him this week. Ryan Fitzpatrick is the final quarterback here that I'm going to talk about. At 75% available, definitely take a look at him. He's been very effective recently. Plays the Bengals this week. They allow the 9th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks, and it'd probably even higher, but their offense sucks, and so quarterbacks don't throw the ball as much as they do against most teams. You guys know that. The stats are a bit skewed. They're one of the worst defenses in the NFL. And Ryan Fitzpatrick, the guy's great. It's hilarious. He looks like a 15-year-old out there playing just in some field somewhere with his friends, throwing the ball around, no look, whatever, just having fun. And, you know, it's crazy because it's equated to fantasy numbers. It really has. In the last 4 games, he has scored 25, 31, 18, and 22 fantasy points. It's a good matchup. I like it a lot. He's been playing very, very well recently and really going out there making some plays. So again, Fitzpatrick, one more guy to look at. Though, as I mentioned, I've talked about all these guys. My favorite is Ryan Tannehill. Then it's probably Trubisky. And then it's Fitzpatrick and Gardner Minshew. I don't typically like to order my waiver wire claims, but I know a lot of you guys have been asking. So I just did it there for the quarterbacks. But anyways, there's about 4 considerations for you guys to look at. Let's move on to the running backs now, though. Because you have to take a look at Raheem Mostert. He's only 18% available, but I have a hard time believing that in 18% of leagues, teams just have better running backs, right? Like 2 better backs and a better flex. I don't know what percentage of you guys are in flex leagues, but he's been so productive recently. He's got 5 touchdowns in the last 4 games, 4 straight games with a rushing touchdown and 1 receiving touchdown. He's been great. He's been very phenomenal. And you know, even the coaches came out, Kyle Shanahan came out and said, you know, there's only so long that he can carry the ball for 6 yards a carry before they just have to give him more touches. And you know what? It's come. The more touches he saw, 19, 10, and 14 carries over the last 3 games. And he has been, as of lately, sort of the leading running back for the 49ers and starting to turn that from a running back by committee to more of a Raheem Mostert's the guy, and they've got some solid backups. I'm not ready to call him the pure starter yet, but man, he's been turning it on lately, and he definitely deserves a spot on a roster for sure. He's probably my number 1 running back pickup this week. I love Raheem Mostert. He's so quick and so effective. It wasn't this last game, but the game before I was watching, turn on the game, chilling there, whatever, on the couch, and man, it's just like a 5-7 whatever. It's not even that many yards. It's not even a 10-yard touchdown run, but he was so quick and explosive that he ran into the ends without getting touched, and it just wasn't even surprising for me. I just sat back and thought, yeah, okay, I mean, how can a defender even catch that? He has been so effective. But let's move on to our next running back. Adrian Peterson. Peterson, not nearly as effective as Raheem Mostert, who we just talked about, but he's got a lot of things that I like about him. He is 47% available, and he's got a good matchup this week versus the Giants. They allow the 15th most fantasy points to opposing running backs. The thing that I like about him is that he's been fairly effective. He's seen red zone usage. He's scored in the touchdowns. And Daryius Slayton is on the IR. Right now, he is the guy in the backfield, and they're using him. He's got 13, 20, and 16 carries, and he's got 3 straight weeks of the rushing touchdown. So if you're in a standard league looking for a guy to plug in, Peterson's is definitely a guy to take a look at. I mean, you look at last week versus the Philadelphia Eagles, he had 16 carries for 66 yards and a touchdown and scored 18 fantasy points. And that was against one of the best run defenses in the NFL. And the Eagles really are. They're a solid run defense all around. And again, Peterson played great. So he's definitely a guy to look at. But as I always mentioned, probably a bit more of a standard league guy than a PPR guy. And he gets a lot of his points from volume. If Geis were there, I would not be telling you to pick him up or play him. Patrick Laird, or whatever his name is, he's a guy to look at. I don't love him, but he is the back in Miami right now, at least, kind of so to speak. He's not going to be for long, and he's like, the 4th or 5th string guy, but due to trades and injuries and all that stuff, he slowly worked his way up. And he plays the Bengals. They've given up the 7th most fantasy points to opposing running backs. That number is actually even worse. The Bengals have allowed 38.5 fantasy points to opposing running backs in just the last 2 games. So while Patrick has not been the most effective running back, if you're in a deep league desperately scrambling for a flex play or a running back too, maybe due to injury or whatever, he can be played because this is a great matchup. There's certainly a lot of risk with it though. And as I always said, this is a waiver wire video, not a start sit video. So I would give a lot of people the advice to pick him up, even if you're not going to play him. And again, depth is really important. You'd hate to go, I've got 2 stud running backs, I'll be fine. And then you don't pick up a backup running back, you don't solidify your bench, and all of a sudden the guy goes down, turns out he's not playing this week, and you're just stuck with nobody at your running back too. I've seen it happen before. Don't act like it won't happen to you, because it can. Just continue to load up your bench. That's what makes good fantasy teams good. And in fact, I don't need to tell you that. If you made the championship this week or you're playing to go to the championship, you are a good fantasy team. And I know you already know this, so I guess my apologies for talking down to you, but always a great reminder to just load up your bench. Finally, the last situation I want to look at is Bo Scarbrough and Wes Hills, running backs for the Detroit Lions. Now, Bo Scarbrough did not play last week as he struggled with some rib issues, but it was a game time decision, which means he almost played. And when you examine that, for me, that means he's going to be playing in this next week. He's also a guy who worked his way up from the practice squad. Like, this guy was not expected to be the back. He still has a lot to prove. And you can bet he's going to be playing. He's going to be playing 100% in this game because, like I said, he's got a lot to prove. His career and getting a good contract out of it and staying with a team and moving up the depth chart and being played next year, like, it all depends on how he finishes this year out. So it's really important. And here's the thing. I don't like Wes Hills. He saw 10 carries for just 21 yards. If Wes Hills is the guy and Scarbrough is out, I wouldn't even pick up Hills. But I would consider picking up Bo Scarbrough and plugging him on your bench because Wes Hills saw 2 touchdowns. He had terrible 2.1 or 2.01 yards per carry. He was just awful. But he still saw 2 touchdowns because they ran him on the goal line. They just gave him the ball and he plunged it in, something that Scarbrough could have easily done. He's been far more effective. Before missing last week, he was a guy who 2 weeks in a row had gotten more than 20 touches. He is really starting to work his way, at least this season. We'll see what happens in the offseason and next year. But as of right now, when he's healthy, he's worked his way into the role as the guy there, and he's absolutely worth a roster spot. I was talking about some waiver wire stuff in the comments of a video 2 weeks ago, and this guy said, I don't like this guy for this reason and that reason and that reason, and he stinks and a lot of stuff. And I just said to him, beggars can't be choosers. Guys, if you're looking at the waiver wire at this point, there's not a lot of considerations to make. And, if you're playing, you don't have the number 1 claim to pick up guys, you may not get the top running back. So I want to list a few guys on here, even though they're not my favorite. As I mentioned, Raheem Mostert, Peterson, those are probably my 2 favorite running backs this week to pick up. Final running back I want to talk about is Carlos Hyde. He's 22% available, and he's coming off a big week, 26 carries for 104 yards and a touchdown. He scored 18.4 fantasy points. He was very effective in a solid win over the Tennessee Titans. Guess congratulations to Houston Texans fans. That was a very important game for you guys to win as far as the division title goes. Carlos Hyde makes me very nervous, and he's only 22% available. That's why, as I mentioned, I probably like Peterson a bit more, Raheem Mostert, because he carries a lot of risk for a guy who's not highly available. At 22% available, he's probably already owned in 12-team leagues. You're probably only going to find him in 10-team leagues or smaller. And when you look at weeks like 2 weeks ago versus New England, 3 weeks ago, he had 10 carries for 17 yards and 3.2 fantasy points. The week after that versus Denver, he had 14 carries for 73 yards and 9.8 fantasy points. He's coming off a big game. He's had some big games, but he has seriously struggled in a lot of games. However, when you look back to good matchups, he has been very effective. Versus Jacksonville, he had 160 rushing yards. He had 116 rushing yards and a touchdown versus Kansas City, and versus Tennessee, he went over 100 and a touchdown. When you break down his games that struggled, they do make me nervous, but the bright side is they were against good defenses. Against Baltimore, they lost 7-41. They got blown out, so he only saw 9 carries, but he still got 65 yards and a touchdown. Versus New England, they won that game. It was a great game, but what happened was he had just 10 carries for 17 yards, but that is against a very good defense. And when you look at it, Texans got up big early and they were running the ball a lot. And of course, that's great strategy, great coaching and everything. But his yards per carry was seriously hurt simply by the fact that the Patriots knew they were going to run the ball and they stuffed the run. They're a great defense. So it is less concerning when you break down that he struggled in tough matchups. But yeah, it is still concerning that he struggles in tough matchups, considering this week he plays the Bucs, who allow the third fewest fantasy points to opposing running backs, though they just gave up 2 rushing touchdowns to Wes Hills. So kind of a Jekyll and Hyde situation here. He's got a lot of potential, but he's got a lot of downside, and he's not super highly available. So I know for a lot of you, he's not going to be an option to pick up this week. Moving on now to the wide receivers, I got to put Terry McLaurin on this list at 27% available. He's got a great matchup versus the Giants. They give up the 4th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. So again, great matchup all around. He's been playing just phenomenal. When you just look at his last 5 games, he had 3 catches for 69 yards, 5 catches for 72 yards off of 12 targets, by the way. He had a bad week versus Carolina with 2 catches for 8 yards. But then the last 2 weeks, he's really stepped it up. And the play of Dwayne Haskins has looked a little bit better, and it has massively boosted the play of Terry McLaurin. He saw 4 catches for 57 yards and a touchdown, and 5 catches for 130 yards and a touchdown. And what I liked most was all 5 of his catches came on just 5 targets. So no drops there, and they really connected quite well. Absolutely love Terry McLaurin. Again, 27% available. If he's out there, you've got to pick him up. Anthony Miller, 74% available. He shouldn't be this available. Pick him up now while you can and consider playing him even. He's been phenomenal. When you look back, last game he had 9 catches for 118 yards and a touchdown. He had 140 yards and 9 catches 3 weeks ago, and last week he had 42 yards and a touchdown. In fact, he's had 6 catches, 9 catches, 3 catches, and 9 catches. He's getting a lot of volume. He is. He's averaging like 10 targets a game over the last 5 games. There's so much to like about this guy. The volume is there. The last 2 weeks, he's found the end zone. He scored 7 times his rookie year. He's a great wide receiver, and I'm really excited to see what he can do next year. But as for this year, at 74% available, he adds a lot of depth to your wide receiver position, and probably even more than depth. Again, for a lot of situations, consider playing him this week, but this isn't a start-sit video, so again, I'd say pick him up even if you're not going to start him. He's just been phenomenal, and he's been fun to watch, and he's been a big part as of why the Bears and Mitchel Trubisky have really gotten that passing game going. And so Anthony Miller, one of those young guys you absolutely need to keep your eye on. I like James Washington too. I mentioned him a few weeks in a row now, but he's still 68% available and he's still playing great. Last week versus Arizona, he saw just 4 targets for 33 yards, but they won 23-17, so it's really not a surprise to me that happened the prior week. But he's been great. He had 90 catches and a touchdown, 90 yards and a touchdown off 6 catches. He had 98 yards and a touchdown, 111 yards and a touchdown. So leading up to that, he had 3 of the last 5 games where have been very great. He's been very effective, and he plays the Jets this coming week, who allow the 10th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. So definitely take a look at James Washington. Zach Pascal, he carries a lot of risk. I'm just going to say watch his Monday night game versus the Saints. I'm recording this Sunday night, so we haven't seen how he's played this week, week 15. But in prior weeks, he'd been great. 5 catches, 74 yards, and a touchdown. The week before that, 7 catches, 109 yards. Carries a lot of upside, and he is 51% available. In the right matchup, he can definitely be played, and I think he's a guy to definitely own. At this point, I think we're starting to whittle down some really good teams, and if his risk scares you and you've got loaded depth, right? If one of your bench wide receivers is Anthony Miller, then maybe stay away from a Zach Pascal, but he has huge upside, and if you're lacking at wideout, he can definitely add a little bit of a pop to your roster. AJ Brown has been the most impressive wide receiver the last 4 weeks, just hands down over anybody. He's been more impressive to me, at least. He's been more impressive than Michael Thomas or DeAndre Hopkins or Adams or anybody. He's been great. As I mentioned, next week, he plays the Saints, who give up the 10th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. So that's a great matchup. He's 28% available. But let's break down the numbers. Versus Jacksonville, he had 135 yards and a touchdown. Then versus Indianapolis, he had an off week. He had just 3 catches for 45 yards. It's only 7.5 fantasy points, but it's versus the Indianapolis Colts. The strength of that team, the strength of that defense is their pass defense. And in fact, The Titans won 31-17. So when you're up big against a good pass defense, you really can't expect him to have a big day. In fact, 3 catches for 45 yards ain't bad. You bounce back to a game versus Oakland where he has 5 catches, 153 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And then the next week, 8 catches for 114 yards and a touchdown. His production has been absolutely through the roof, and you absolutely need to pick up A.J. Brown at this point if you still can. All right, so Daryius Slayton, he's another one of those guys. He's one of those A.J. Browns. He's a young wide receiver. He's just surprised me recently, turning it on, just absolutely been great. Got to pick him up. Plays the Redskins this week. They do give up the 14th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers, but they have allowed wide receivers to score 5 touchdowns in the last 5 games versus them. So that kind of that pass defense has actually been trending down a little bit recently. And heading into last week, I didn't update my stats on this, but heading into last week, he had 15.6 fantasy points per game over the previous 4 games. That, by the way, was best in the NFL amongst wide receivers. So that's a great matchup. And then he had 2 catches for 31 yards and a touchdown this last game, which was just 11 fantasy points. That is not good. That's not bad. That's just okay. But he found the end zone. And for me, really looking at it, he's got to be at this point looking into next year, and I don't want to talk too much about next year, but I put him as my favorite to be the #1 wide receiver on that Giants roster. At least that's the way he's been playing lately. He's really surprised me. He's definitely one of those guys who he just makes big plays. He's fun to watch, and he's been one of those pieces to that offense. A struggling offense, by the way, one of the few pieces that has indeed been working, especially in an offense that struggled so much that even Barkley has been very limited. But he is certainly hurt by the play of Eli Manning recently, and I think he'd be helped a lot more if and when Daniel Jones comes back. I take a look at Robby Anderson. He's 32% available, and while he does certainly carry risk, he's been a bit of a disappointment this year. Things have turned around quite a bit recently for him. In the last 5 games, he's had some very good games. Now, some of those were in easy matchups against the Redskins, who are a pretty mediocre defense, Oakland, Cincinnati, and Miami, all bad defenses. And then last week versus the Ravens, that's a tough defense, but it's just one of his 5 games. But he did really turn into a lot of production. In the last 5 games, he's got 3 touchdowns and a 2-point conversion. He's gone over 100 yards twice. He also had 86 yards and 66 yards. He's really worked his way into that role. It's weird. I don't understand Robby Anderson. It seems like every year of his career, he stinks and he stinks and he stinks, and then he turns it on for about 5 games, and then he stinks for another 10. But at this point, I definitely like him. And when you're coming off a game with 4 catches, 66 yards, and a 2-point conversion versus a tough Baltimore Ravens defense, that's really not so bad. And I don't think he's great. He's not a must start every week, but he's a must own. And that's something that we should talk about. We always do. I mean, I always see it. Hop on Instagram, hop on YouTube, hop on wherever on the internet, and it's like must starts this week, must starts this week. But like, let's talk about depth, right? Let's talk about your bench. Who are the must owns? The guys you don't have to start, but have to be on your roster. For me, at wide receiver, probably coming in at a wide receiver 4 or 5 or a 6 in that sort of range on the bench, Robby Anderson is definitely one of those guys. Brashad Perriman, he is 90% available, and man, I'm telling you right now, if you played him this week, I know a few people who really took a gamble on him. If you played him this week, good for you. It certainly worked out for you. That was very risky, but man, it worked out for you. And this week coming up, you definitely are glad you picked him up and you own him. Again, at 90% available, not many of you did, but definitely pick him up this week. This is the guy, the wide receiver of all the wide receivers to pick up this week. With Mike Evans out and Chris Godwin questionable, he could be the #1 wide receiver in the Tampa Bay offense. Now, here's what we know right now. Godwin, in the last game, had a non-contact injury that he suffered while running a route. I believe it was in the middle of the 3rd quarter, and he was actually pulled off to the sidelines. Looked like he was actually pretty limp, and went into the locker room, and just very quickly later turned out that he was not. He was ruled out. He was not coming back in that game. And I don't expect him to. He's too young and too talented on a team that doesn't have Super Bowl contention hopes. But we get Perryman, who's coming into this role, and he's played great recently. 5 catches, 87 yards, 3 catches, 70 yards, and a touchdown, and then 5 catches, 113 yards, and 3 touchdowns. That is what his last 3 games have looked like. Furthermore, he plays the Texans this week along the 15th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. So a very middle of the road pass defense there. Perriman for me is the must play, must own wide receiver of the week. As they say, one man's trash is another man's treasure. If you were unfortunate enough to have Mike Evans or Chris Godwin go down for you, well, then your treasure, your trash is the injury, but your treasure is Perriman, and hopefully you can go out there and get that solid replacement. I would not be at all surprised to see him get 5 to 7 catches over 100 yards and a touchdown or two this coming week, as Winston's got to throw the ball somewhere. Also got to talk about Dede, Westbrook, and Chris Conley, both guys to take a look at. DJ Chark is out, making them the wide receiver 1 and 2. Now Chris Conley is 78% available to Dede Westbrook's 30% available, but they've both been very productive recently. Heading into last week, Westbrook has 29 catches off 40 targets since week 7, was 5th best qualifying catch percentage among wide receivers, among I believe 67 qualifying wide receivers. In fact, the league average is 61 catch percent, his is 72, so that's a big number. He's been very effective. Last week was bad versus Oakland. He had just 2 catches for 14 yards, though they did win 20-16. So you win a game, it's a low-scoring game, and they are slightly managing Gardner Minshew, who's a bit unexperienced, probably more than a bit, but you know what I'm saying. Anyways, he's a guy who's going to get you probably 7 to 9 targets a game. Chris Conley, on the other hand, he actually played better this last game. His 4 catches for 49 yards and 2 touchdowns. And his last few games have been great. 6 catches, 4 catches, 4 catches, 1, and then 4. So yeah, the volume is there for those guys, absolutely. I would pick them up, and when we consider all the wide receivers who are injured, who are banged up, who have tough matchups, and maybe aren't already great, or guys who are, again, injured, not playing this week, going to sit, all in all, I definitely have to consider the fact that for a lot of people, they are very playable this week, though I don't love them. So, and especially playing in a championship game, I hope you have better options. But if you're desperate, those are some guys to take a look at. Of the two, I like Westbrook more. He did have an off week, and I understand that Chris Conley played better, but before that, he was playing far better. He had 6 catches on 103 yards off 9 targets. Then he gets hurt, so he misses 2 weeks, and they have the bye week. Comes back, he has 6 targets, 4 catches, 9 targets, 8 catches, 8 targets, 5 catches, and 7 targets, 6 catches. So you can see that before last game, he was getting more targets and usage and production than Conley. So yeah, I do expect Dede Westbrook to be the guy I like more than Conley. But let's move on to one more wide receiver to take a look at this week. If you're looking for a standard league guy, 30% available, Marquise Brown is definitely a guy to take a look at. Also, that's my catchphrase now. My apologies, I probably said that 15 times in this video already, but oh well, it's too late. Anyways, Marquise Brown, take a look at him. Here's why. He's got 7 touchdowns on just 43 catches. So he's got very low volume this year, but he is top 4 in touchdown rate per catch amongst NFL wide receivers. He's been great. In fact, he's got 4 touchdowns in the last 6 games, while only averaging a little over 3 catches a game. And so that's why I say, in a PPR league, I lean away from him because you're really gambling on a touchdown. But if you're in a standard league, you're essentially gambling on a touchdown anyways because you don't get points for catches, and yardage is great, but really touchdowns are king in standard leagues. So Marquise Brown is a guy to take a look at. Most players in the NFL I do not trust to be touchdown dependent. I don't care how phenomenal you are, I just don't trust you to do it. But in this Ravens offense, in an offense where Lamar Jackson can just barely throw 200 yards and still somehow manage 5 touchdowns, 4 passing touchdowns, yeah, I do. This is one of the most phenomenal and efficient offenses in the NFL. And one of the things that they're really able to do is throw the ball in the red zone pretty effectively. Because they run the ball with their running backs, with their quarterback, on all these different schemes and how effective he is, teams get into the red zone. They really focus on that. And you actually see John Harbaugh, the coaching staff, the Ravens as a whole, they capitalize on that and they throw a fair amount of touchdowns considering, again, Marquise Brown in standard leagues does carry some risk, but like I said, touchdowns are king. You're gambling on a touchdown in a standard league anyways, so Marquise Brown is definitely a guy to look at this week. For the tight ends, Higbee has been so impressive. In the last 3 weeks, he's had 107 yards, 116 yards, and 111 yards, and his usage has increased. So the first game he had 8 targets, 7 catches, 107 yards. Then he had 11 targets, 7 catches, 116 yards. Then he saw 14 targets and 12 catches for 111 yards. So he's increased his targets 3 straight weeks. When he came out that first game, he had 7 catches for over 100 yards and a touchdown. He looked great, but my first thought was, we'll see when Gerald Everett comes back. But Gerald Everett has not been back and very well may not be back. And even when he is back, it's abundantly clear to me that Higbee is the guy. And he's a guy who gets more targets than some wide receivers. Again, he's got so many targets. He's got over 30 targets in the last 3 games. Absolutely pick him up. Consider playing him for sure. He's not even a guy to look at. He's a guy to capitalize on now before he is owned. Again, he is 33% available. Not super highly available, but definitely worth peeking in your league just to see what's out there because he certainly may be. But there are a few other tight ends to talk about, so let's move on and get to those guys. Another guy is Mike Gesicki. 2 weeks ago against the Jets, he had just 1 catch for 6 yards. That offense as a whole struggled, but he bounced back last week, 4 catches for 47 yards. And the 2 prior weeks, he had 2 back-to-back touchdowns those games and had 28 and 79 yards. And he's a guy who's actually fair in his catches. He's actually getting quite a bit of usage, and I like him as a dynasty guy for next year. Not necessarily to keep, but mostly just to keep my eye on, because over the last, I believe, 7 games, he's had 6 catches, 3 catches, 4, 3, 5, 1, and 4. So he's a guy who could easily get you 4 to 6 catches in a game. And a lot of people struggle to translate standard league to PPR. Let me do it for you. It's pretty simple. Every 6 catches counted as a touchdown. I mean, that's essentially what it is. So if a guy is able to get you 6 catches in a game, that's worth a touchdown. It really is. That's kind of straightforward. There's a little bit more to it than that, but absolutely, Mike Gesicki, he's been turning things on lately. And again, he is 72% available. Plays the Bengals this week, who allow the 10th fewest fantasy points to opposing tight ends. But I said it earlier in the video, they're not a good defense. They just look like a better fantasy defense, or it look like a better defense as far as allowing opposing fantasy players not much, because you score 20 points on them and essentially you beat the Bengals at this point. But let's move on. We got 2 more tight ends to talk about. One of them being Jason Witten. Jason Witten has found the end zone in 2 of the last 3 weeks. He's got 5 catches, 1, 6, 5, and 4. So he's a fair start as far as getting volume and getting some PPR points. He's only going to get you about 30 to 40 yards. But if he can get you 5 catches, 40 yards, and a touchdown, that'll equate to like 15 fantasy points or whatever. That's a pretty good day. So I definitely take a look at playing Jason Witten this week. He plays the Eagles. They give up the 8th fewest fantasy points to opposing tight ends, but they do give a lot of points to wide receivers because as a whole, they're a bad pass defense. And again, he's not a guy who's moving the chains a lot. He's used all the time. He's typically one of those more red zone threats, or if you're in a 3rd and short, move the chains. A guy who plays a lot like a basketball player, gets in the right situation, he'll just box out, make the catch, and fall over. I've seen him do it quite a few times this year. So especially take a look at him if you're looking for sort of a tight end in deeper leagues. I don't like this guy as a top 6 tight end, but I do like this guy for sure, probably even in a 12-team league. I mean, I have to imagine this week he's probably going to be inside the top 12 for tight ends. And finally, guys, Dallas Goedert, he is much like some of the other guys we've talked about. Now, it's been 4 straight games without a touchdown, but he's had, 7 catches, 6 catches, 5 catches. So again, like some of those other guys, he's getting a lot of catches. He's good to get you about 40 to 60 yards. And in the past, he had quite a bit of touchdowns in weeks prior. He's 39% available. He's got a good matchup versus the Cowboys. They give up the 12th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. And the biggest thing he benefits from is Carson Wentz has got to throw the ball somewhere. With all those wide receivers out, the number 2 targets are Ertz and then Goedert. I mean, that's really what it's been like. In fact, I was watching the Eagles game earlier, and it was funny. It was like the 4th quarter. I don't remember how much time was left in the game, but it was like the 4th quarter, and he had thrown just 21 yards to his wide receivers, Carson Wentz had. And yet he had thrown like 130 yards to his tight ends and running backs combined. So you can really see the way that offense is working right now. Goedert as a tight end too makes some people uncomfortable. I know you want the guy who's the starter. And I mentioned it many times before, the tight end position is simply so thin that in deep leagues, he should be played anyways, especially in deep PPR leagues where, again, he's going to get you, 4, 5, 6 catches a game, which could essentially equate to a touchdown. But that's my wrap up for this video, guys. I didn't talk about dynasty pickups. If you are wondering about that, if you are out of it and you just want to say, hey, who should I pick up as a potential keeper for next year, then you know what? Leave a comment down below. I would love to talk about it with you guys, and I'll be making those Dynasty Keeper League videos coming up soon. I just haven't had time. Things have been crazy busy recovering from being sick and trying to do all these videos without Rob, as well as do a good quality videos now, because some of us are trying to win championships now. But anyways, guys, thank you so much for your support. You guys have been fantastic. I absolutely appreciate everything that you guys do for me. You guys have a good day, and God bless.